You're probably going to die anyway. You're probably going to die anyway, so I changed your life insurance beneficiary to my sister. Already moved out and found someone better. Thanks for the $850,000. I read the text message 3 times through the morphine haze, each word hitting harder than the heart attack that had nearly killed me 3 days earlier. My wife Celeste had just stolen my life insurance policy while I was unconscious in the ICU, fighting for every breath. My name is Garrett Holloway. I'm 47, and I've been a risk assessment analyst for Mountain West Insurance for 12 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spend my days calculating mortality probabilities and life insurance payouts, helping people protect their families from exactly this kind of financial catastrophe. Now I was staring at my phone, reading about my own policy being weaponized against me by the person I trusted most. I read the message 3 times, my heart monitor beeping faster with each pass. $850,000 in coverage. Money meant to protect Celeste if something happened to me. Money I'd been paying premiums on for 2 years. Money she just transferred to her sister Vivian while I was sedated and intubated, unable to speak or sign anything. The cardiac unit was quiet except for the constant humming of machines keeping me alive. Through my window, I could see the Rocky Mountains in the distance, snow-capped peaks that had always calmed me. But nothing could calm the rage building in my chest as I processed what had just happened. Celeste thought she was being clever, thought I was too weak, too medicated, too close to death to do anything about it. She'd underestimated 2 things, my will to survive and my professional understanding of insurance law. The thing about working in risk assessment is you learn to spot patterns, anticipate worst-case scenarios, and most importantly, you always read the fine print. Every contract, every policy, every legal document that crosses your desk gets the same treatment. Thorough analysis and contingency planning. As I lay there, machines monitoring my fragile recovery, I realized Celeste had just made the biggest miscalculation of her life. She thought she was securing her future. Instead, she just activated mine. Being a risk assessment analyst isn't just about crunching numbers and calculating probabilities. It's about understanding human behavior under pressure, predicting how people react when money is involved, and most importantly, knowing how insurance fraud works from the inside out. I've seen every scam, every loophole attempt, every desperate scheme people cook up when they think they've found a way to beat the system. My office at Mountain West Insurance sits on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Denver, overlooking the same mountains I could see from my hospital bed. For 12 years, I'd analyzed thousands of suspicious claims, fraudulent applications, and beneficiary disputes. I knew the red flags by heart: sudden policy changes, family disputes over coverage, suspicious timing around medical emergencies. The same desk where I'd flagged countless fraudulent beneficiary changes was where I'd first reviewed my own policy 8 years ago. Standard term life insurance, $850,000 coverage, with built-in protections I'd specifically requested based on cases I'd handled. I wasn't just another policyholder. I was someone who understood exactly how these policies could be manipulated, and more importantly, how to prevent that manipulation. My colleagues often joked about my paranoia. Garrett thinks everyone's trying to scam him, they'd say when I'd spend extra time verifying client information or questioning sudden policy modifications. But paranoia in my profession wasn't a weakness. It was a survival skill. When you've seen a grieving widow discover her deceased husband secretly change the beneficiary to his mistress, or watched adult children fight over policies their parents never intended them to have, you learn to protect yourself. The cardiac monitors in my room beeped steadily as I thought about all the cases I'd handled involving family betrayal and insurance fraud. The patterns were always the same. Someone gains access during a vulnerable moment, makes unauthorized changes, and assumes the victim won't be able to fight back. They count on confusion, grief, or in my case, medical incapacitation to cover their tracks. But Celeste had forgotten one crucial detail. I didn't just know how insurance fraud worked. I was the person who stopped it for a living. Celeste and I met 3 years ago at a charity gala in Boulder. She was working as an event coordinator for a nonprofit focused on women's health initiatives, beautiful and passionate about her cause. I was immediately drawn to her energy, her laugh, the way she could command a room while organizing fundraising efforts. She seemed like someone who cared about making a difference in the world. Our relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, we were living together in my house in Golden, a small mountain town 20 minutes from Denver. She moved in with just a few soup boxes and a rescue dog named Luna, claimed she'd always lived minimally, focused on experiences rather than possessions. I admired that about her, especially coming from someone who spent his days analyzing the financial catastrophes that happened when people weren't prepared. We married after a year of dating in a small ceremony at the Rocky Mountain National Park. Her family was supportive but distant. Her sister Vivian flew in from Phoenix, along with their parents who seemed pleasant enough but clearly weren't wealthy. Celeste often mentioned feeling like the black sheep for not pursuing a practical career like Vivian, who worked in real estate development. The first few years were genuinely good. Celeste continued her nonprofit work while I advanced at Mountain West Insurance. We took weekend trips to ski resorts, hiked 14ers in the summer, talked about maybe having kids someday. She showed interest in my work, asking thoughtful questions about risk assessment and insurance policies. I thought she was just being a supportive wife. But something shifted after my promotion to senior analyst 18 months ago. The salary increase was substantial, and with it came better benefits, including the option to increase my life insurance coverage. When I mentioned upgrading to the $850,000 policy, Celeste was enthusiastic, said it showed how much I cared about our future together. That's when her questions about my work became more frequent and specific. She wanted to understand beneficiary rules, policy change procedures, what happened if someone became incapacitated. I thought she was being responsible, maybe even considering getting her own coverage. I answered every question thoroughly, even showed her some case files where families had been protected or devastated by insurance decisions. Looking back from my hospital bed, I realized those weren't the questions of a caring wife planning for our future. They were the questions of someone planning for my absence. The heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. I was reviewing a particularly complex fraud case when the chest pain hit like a sledgehammer. By the time the paramedics arrived at my office, I was unconscious. The next thing I remembered was waking up 3 days later in the ICU, throat raw from intubation, chest scarred from emergency surgery. Dr. Patricia Reeves, my cardiologist, explained that I'd suffered what they called a widowmaker, a massive blockage in the left anterior descending artery. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. "Another few minutes and we would have lost you." The recovery would be long, she warned. Weeks in the hospital, months of cardiac rehabilitation, significant lifestyle changes ahead. Celeste's reaction to my near-death experience should have been my first real warning sign. While I was fighting for my life in surgery, she was asking detailed questions about my condition, my prognosis, whether the doctors thought I would make a full recovery. The nurses mentioned how practical she was being, asking about medical directives and insurance coverage while I was still unconscious. When I first woke up, Celeste was sitting beside my bed, but something felt different. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, asking the doctors technical questions about my recovery timeline. She kept mentioning how scared she was of being left alone, how she didn't know what she'd do if something happened to me. At the time, I thought it was normal anxiety from a traumatic situation. But then came the conversations with Vivian. I'd hear Celeste whispering on phone calls in the hallway, mentioning contingency plans and being prepared for anything. When I asked about it, she said Vivian was just being supportive, helping her think through practical matters while I recovered. She even suggested Vivian fly out to help during my recovery, said her sister had experience dealing with medical crises. The final warning sign came 2 days before the text message. Celeste brought in a stack of paperwork, claiming the hospital needed updated insurance information and emergency contacts. She said my signature was required on several forms, but I was too medicated to read them carefully. When I hesitated, she became impatient, saying the hospital was pressuring her to get everything filed quickly. I signed what she put in front of me, trusting that my wife of 3 years was protecting my interests while I was vulnerable. The morphine made it hard to focus on details, and I was more concerned with just staying alive than scrutinizing paperwork. That signature, I would soon learn, had just authorized the theft of my own life insurance policy. The morning Celeste sent that text message, she'd already been laying groundwork for weeks. While I was sedated and fighting for my life, she'd been busy researching insurance law, consulting with lawyers, and apparently coordinating with Vivian about how to execute their plan. The paperwork I'd signed hadn't been hospital forms at all. They were beneficiary change requests she'd somehow obtained from my insurance company. What I didn't realize until later was how much preparation had gone into this moment. Celeste had been documenting my medical condition, collecting doctors' statements about my prognosis, building a case that I was mentally incapacitated due to medication and trauma. She'd even recorded conversations with my medical team, asking leading questions about my cognitive state and decision-making ability. The text message was just the beginning. Over the next few hours, while I lay in the ICU trying to process what had happened, Celeste sent a series of follow-up messages that revealed the depth of her planning. She'd already consulted with a lawyer about the legality of the beneficiary change. She'd researched Colorado laws about medical incapacitation and decision-making authority. She'd even opened a joint bank account with Vivian to receive the insurance payout. "I know you're upset," one message read, "but the doctor said you might not survive the recovery process. Even if you do, your quality of life will be severely limited. This way, at least the money goes to someone who can use it to build a real future, not just pay for endless medical bills and care." Another message revealed even more manipulation. "Vivian and I have been researching your condition. The statistics for men your age surviving this type of heart attack aren't good. We're just being practical about what's likely to happen. You always said insurance was about preparing for the worst-case scenario." But the message that really showed her true colors came that evening. "I've already moved out of the house. Vivian found me a place in Phoenix where I can start over. The stress of watching you die slowly wasn't something I could handle. At least this way we both get closure." Reading those messages through the fog of painkillers and heart monitors, I realized Celeste hadn't just stolen my insurance policy. She'd been planning to abandon me entirely. The woman I'd married, who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, had decided my near-death experience was her opportunity for a financial fresh start. She'd underestimated one crucial factor. I wasn't going to die, and I understood insurance law better than she did. The thing about working in insurance fraud detection is that you learn to think several moves ahead. While Celeste was celebrating what she thought was a perfect crime, I was lying in my hospital bed, mentally reviewing every case I'd ever handled involving fraudulent beneficiary changes. I knew exactly what she'd done wrong, and more importantly, I knew exactly how to prove it. First, I needed to understand the scope of her deception. Using my laptop, which the nurses had brought from home, I logged into my insurance company's online portal. The beneficiary change was there, dated 3 days earlier, with what appeared to be my electronic signature. But there was something Celeste didn't know about my policy, something I'd added as a precaution based on all the fraud cases I'd investigated. My policy included what's called a change verification protocol. Any beneficiary modifications required not just a signature, but also a secondary verification step, either a notarized witness statement or a phone interview with the policyholder. This protection was specifically designed to prevent exactly what Celeste had attempted: unauthorized changes during medical emergencies or incapacitation. I called the insurance company's fraud hotline directly. "This is Garrett Holloway, policy number MWI847392. I need to report an unauthorized beneficiary change on my life insurance policy." The fraud investigator, Janet Morales, was someone I'd worked with on previous cases. She knew my reputation and took my call seriously. "Garrett, I heard about your heart attack. Are you saying someone changed your beneficiary without authorization?" When I explained the situation, Janet was immediately concerned. "We never completed the verification protocol on that change. It should have been flagged in our system, but somehow it was processed anyway. This is definitely fraud." Within hours, Janet had initiated a formal investigation, and temporarily frozen any claims against my policy. More importantly, she'd discovered something Celeste didn't know. The electronic signature on the beneficiary change didn't match my actual signature pattern in their system. Their digital forensics team could prove the signature was forged. But I wasn't just going to stop the fraud. I was going to make sure Celeste faced the full consequences of her actions. I began documenting everything. Screenshots of her text messages, call logs showing coordination with Vivian, even the fake hospital paperwork she'd used to trick me into signing documents. The medical staff had been keeping detailed records of my condition and medication levels. I requested copies, knowing they would prove I was too heavily sedated to make informed decisions about insurance beneficiaries. Dr. Reeves confirmed that during the time period when the change was supposedly made, I was barely conscious and certainly not capable of understanding complex financial documents. Celeste thought she'd found the perfect opportunity to commit fraud. Instead, she just provided me with everything I needed to destroy her. The investigation moved quickly once Janet Morales got involved. Within 48 hours, Mountain West Insurance had not only reversed the fraudulent beneficiary change, but had also flagged Celeste and Vivian in their fraud database. But that was just the beginning of the legal avalanche heading their way. Celeste's overconfidence became apparent through her continued text messages. She seemed to believe that once the beneficiary change was processed, she was in the clear. "I know you're probably trying to fight this," she texted, "but my lawyer says it's legally binding. You signed the papers, and there are witnesses to your mental state. Even if you survive, you won't be able to prove anything." What Celeste didn't realize was that her lawyer was actually just a legal aid attorney she'd consulted for free advice, not someone who specialized in insurance fraud. Her research had been surface level at best, missing crucial details about verification protocols and fraud prevention measures that someone in my position would naturally know about. Meanwhile, Vivian had already started spending money she thought was coming her way. According to Janet's investigation, Vivian had made significant purchases in Phoenix: a new car, deposits on a luxury apartment, even enrollment in some kind of life coaching certification program. She'd been posting on social media about her unexpected financial blessing and new opportunities opening up. The sisters had also made a critical mistake. They'd communicated about their plan through email and text messages, creating a digital paper trail that investigators could easily access. Celeste had even searched for information about insurance fraud penalties on her home computer, not realizing that such searches could be subpoenaed as evidence of premeditation. Dr. Reeves had been following the situation and was appalled by what had happened. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen someone attempt to defraud their spouse while they were fighting for their life in the ICU," she told me. She volunteered to provide detailed medical testimony about my condition and capacity during the time of the alleged beneficiary change. The hospital's legal department also got involved when they learned that fraudulent documents had been presented as official hospital paperwork. They were considering pressing their own charges against Celeste for document forgery and misrepresentation. As my physical condition improved, my legal position strengthened. I was able to speak clearly, think critically, and provide detailed testimony about the fraud. Celeste's claim that I was mentally incapacitated was falling apart as doctors confirmed my cognitive recovery was complete and rapid. 3 days after her original text message, Celeste called me directly for the first time since the fraud attempt. Her tone was different, less confident, more desperate. "Garrett, we need to talk about this situation." Celeste's voice on the phone was strained, trying to sound reasonable but betraying underlying panic. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the insurance paperwork." I was sitting up in my hospital bed, finally strong enough to have a real conversation. My heart rate was stable, my mind was clear, and I had Janet Morales on a 3-way call, recording everything for the investigation. "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and professional. "The lawyers are saying there might be some issues with how the beneficiary change was processed. Something about verification procedures that weren't followed properly. I'm sure we can work this out between us without involving lawyers and investigators." Janet jumped in at that point. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Janet Morales from Mountain West Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit. We've already completed our preliminary review. and what we found goes far beyond procedural issues. This appears to be a coordinated attempt at insurance fraud involving forged signatures, false documentation, and conspiracy to commit theft. The silence on Celeste's end of the call stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, scared. "I want to speak to my husband privately." "That's not going to happen," Janet said firmly. "This is now a formal investigation. Any communication between you and Mr. Holloway regarding this matter needs to be documented. We also need to inform you that we've forwarded our findings to the Denver District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution." "Criminal prosecution?" Celeste's voice cracked. This was just a family matter, a misunderstanding about paperwork. Garrett was sick, confused. He didn't understand what he was signing. I finally spoke up. "Celeste, I understand exactly what I signed and what you did afterward. I also understand Colorado insurance law, federal fraud statutes, and the penalties for conspiracy to commit theft of this magnitude. The question is, do you?" Janet had more devastating news for Celeste. "We've also discovered that your sister Vivian has already spent several $1,000s based on anticipated insurance proceeds. That constitutes money laundering and conspiracy charges. Both of you are looking at felony prosecution." The next sound we heard was Celeste crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd gotten used to over the past year, but the genuine panic of someone who just realized their clever plan was actually a disaster. I was scared. The doctor said you might not make it, and I didn't know what I'd do financially. Vivian said it was the smart thing to do, to protect ourselves." "Protecting yourself would have been getting a job," I said. "What you did was attempt to steal $850,000 through fraud while I was unconscious in the ICU. There's a significant legal difference." The meeting with Celeste and her attorney took place 5 days later in the hospital's conference room. I was finally strong enough to be moved to a wheelchair for the occasion, though I was still connected to a portable heart monitor. Present were myself, Janet Morales, the hospital's legal counsel, Celeste, and her new attorney. A real one this time, not the legal aid volunteer. Celeste's attorney, Harold Brennan, was clearly uncomfortable with his client's situation. He'd obviously reviewed the evidence and realized his job wasn't to win the case, but to minimize the damage. "My client would like to propose a resolution that avoids criminal prosecution," he began. "She's willing to cooperate fully with the investigation and make full restitution for any damages." Janet spread out the evidence file on the conference table. The digital forensics report showed definitively that my signature had been forged using some kind of electronic signature software. The medical records proved I was heavily sedated and unable to make complex decisions during the time frame of the beneficiary change. Most damaging of all were the text messages and emails between Celeste and Vivian, planning the fraud in detail. "Mrs. Holloway," Janet said, "you researched insurance fraud penalties on your home computer 3 weeks before your husband's heart attack. You coordinated with your sister to establish a joint account for receiving fraudulent proceeds. You created fake hospital documents to deceive your husband into signing unrelated paperwork. This isn't a family misunderstanding. It's premeditated felony fraud." The hospital's attorney added another layer of problems. Mrs. Holloway also misrepresented herself to our medical staff, claiming authority to make financial decisions for her husband while he was incapacitated. She obtained confidential medical information under false pretenses and used it to support her fraud. The hospital is considering its own legal action. Celeste looked physically ill as the scope of her legal problems became clear. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "I just thought, if Garrett died, at least the money would go to family instead of just disappearing into medical bills and debt." "But I didn't die," I said quietly. "And even if I had, stealing life insurance proceeds is still felony theft. The money was meant to protect you as my wife, not to fund your escape to Phoenix with another man." That's when Janet revealed the most damaging evidence of all. Mrs. Holloway also began her relationship with Derek Martinez, the life coach from Phoenix, 6 weeks before her husband's heart attack. Their communications show they were planning a life together using insurance proceeds, whether Mr. Holloway survived or not. Harold Brennan looked at his client with barely concealed disgust. Celeste, you didn't mention the relationship timeline in our preparation sessions. Celeste was crying again, but this time it looked more like self-pity than genuine remorse. Derek understands me in ways Garrett never did. He helped me realize I deserved better than being married to someone who works all the time and never thinks about my emotional needs. So you decided to commit felony fraud, I said. That's your version of personal growth? The legal resolution came swiftly once all the evidence was compiled. Celeste, faced with overwhelming proof of premeditated fraud and the prospect of 5 to 10 years in federal prison, accepted a plea bargain. She would plead guilty to insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and document forgery in exchange for 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and full restitution of all costs associated with the investigation. Vivian faced similar charges in Arizona, where she'd spent the money she thought was coming from my death. The life coaching certification program she'd enrolled in turned out to be another scam. She'd been defrauded by Derek Martinez, who had apparently been running cons on vulnerable women across multiple states. Poetic justice at its finest. The divorce proceedings were remarkably straightforward. Colorado's fraud statutes invalidated any claim Celeste might have had to marital assets given her criminal conviction. She forfeited all rights to property, retirement accounts, and any financial support. The house in Golden, my retirement savings, everything we'd built together became mine alone. Derek Martinez, the life coach who'd inspired Celeste's betrayal, disappeared completely when the criminal charges were filed. Turned out his entire operation was fraudulent. Fake credentials, fake testimonials, fake promises of financial freedom through manifesting abundance. Celeste had been as much a victim of his con as she'd tried to make me a victim of hers. The final insult came when Celeste tried to contact me from county jail, asking if I'd consider helping with her legal fees. "We were married for 2 years," she said through tears during the collect call. "Doesn't that mean anything to you? I made a mistake, but I'm still the woman you fell in love with." "No," I told her calmly. "The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have tried to steal my life insurance while I was dying in the ICU. That person never existed." I hung up and blocked all further calls from the correctional facility. My recovery from the heart attack progressed better than Dr. Reeves had initially predicted. The stress of the fraud situation had actually motivated me to focus intensely on my rehabilitation. Cardiac therapy, dietary changes, exercise programs. I attacked my recovery with the same analytical precision I brought to fraud investigations. 6 months after the heart attack, I was back at work at Mountain West Insurance, with a new perspective on the cases I handled. Having been a victim of attempted fraud myself, I understood the emotional devastation it caused in ways I'd never grasped before. The house in Golden felt different without Celeste, but not empty. Quieter, more peaceful. I'd kept Luna, the rescue dog, who seemed happier with just the two of us. 18 months later, I received an unexpected phone call while reviewing quarterly fraud statistics at my office. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably Celeste's. "Garrett, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm in a really bad situation and I didn't know who else to call." Her voice sounded different, older, defeated. She'd been released from prison 2 weeks earlier, she explained, and was living in a halfway house in Aurora. "Derek took everything," she continued. "Not just the money from the fraud attempt, but money I'd borrowed from friends, my savings, even money I took from the nonprofit where I worked. He convinced me it was all an investment in our future together, but it was just another con. I lost my job, my apartment, my car. I have nothing left." I listened without interrupting, remembering all the fraud victims I'd counseled over the years who'd called their betrayers looking for help after being betrayed by someone else. "I know I hurt you terribly," Celeste said, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm facing homelessness. And I thought, maybe you'd consider helping me get back on my feet. Just a small loan to help me find a place to live and get a job." The silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. Finally, I spoke. Celeste, do you remember what you texted me while I was in the ICU fighting for my life? I remember. I was scared and made terrible decisions. You said you were starting fresh with someone who deserves a real future. You said the doctors thought I might not make it anyway, so at least the money would go to someone who could use it properly. I kept my voice level, professional. Those weren't the words of someone who was scared. Those were the words of someone who thought they'd found a clever way to get rich off their husband's death. I was different then. Prison changed me. I've had time to think about what I did, and I'm genuinely sorry. I'm sure you are sorry. Sorry that your plan didn't work. Sorry that Derek betrayed you the same way you betrayed me. Sorry that you're facing the consequences of your choices. But that's not my problem to solve. So you're just going to let me become homeless? After everything we meant to each other? I thought about that question carefully. Celeste, when I was dying in that hospital, you didn't see a husband to support through a medical crisis. You saw an opportunity to steal money and start over with another man. Why would you expect me to see anything different in you now? Because I'm asking for help, and you're a good person. Good people don't commit felony fraud against their spouses. You made your choice 18 months ago. Now you get to live with it. I hung up and added her new number to my blocked contacts list. 3 years have passed since that final conversation with Celeste. My life has settled into a rhythm that feels both familiar and completely new. The heart attack forced lifestyle changes that turned out to be improvements. Better diet, regular exercise, more time spent outdoors in the Colorado mountains I love. My cardiologist says my heart health is now better than most men half my age. Mountain West Insurance promoted me to Director of Fraud Prevention, a role that allows me to use my personal experience to help other victims of financial betrayal. I've testified in dozens of cases, trained investigators across multiple states, and developed new protocols for preventing the exact type of fraud Celeste attempted. There's a certain satisfaction in turning the worst experience of my life into expertise that protects others. The house in Golden became truly mine after I renovated it completely. New kitchen, updated office space, a workshop in the garage where I've taken up woodworking as cardiac rehabilitation therapy. Luna and I have established our routines, morning hikes before work, evening walks around the neighborhood, weekend trips to the mountains for longer adventures. 6 months ago, I met Rachel Chen at a cardiac rehabilitation support group. She's a nurse practitioner who survived her own heart attack at 44, understands the psychological as well as physical recovery process. We've been taking things slowly, building trust carefully. She knows about Celeste, about the fraud attempt, about my wariness around financial matters and relationships. Trust but verify, Rachel said with a laugh when I explained my approach to sharing financial information. That's not romantic, but it's honest. She keeps her finances separate, pays her own way on dates, insists on splitting costs for shared activities. It's refreshing to be with someone who understands that financial independence isn't about lack of trust. It's about maintaining individual integrity. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Celeste eventually found stable housing and employment in Denver, working as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. She never remarried, never had the glamorous fresh start she'd planned with Derek Martinez. The criminal conviction makes certain types of employment difficult, limits her housing options, follows her in background checks. She's living with the long-term consequences of 18 months of poor decisions. Sometimes I wonder if I could have seen the warning signs earlier, protected myself better, maybe even saved our marriage through different choices. But then I remember that text message she sent while I was fighting for my life in the ICU. And I know the truth. Some betrayals reveal character that was always there, just hidden until the right opportunity arose. The most valuable lesson came from my father's old advice, which I'd heard him say but never fully understood until I needed it. The best insurance policy isn't the one that pays out when something goes wrong. It's the one that prevents things from going wrong in the first place. I'd thought he was talking about risk assessment and fraud prevention. Turns out he was talking